Howdy, all you delicious people. I am here today to review Oculus from 2013. I had recently seen Mirrors, and for some reason, I had started to remember this film while watching that movie, but I never really knew what the name of this movie was. So, the weird thing about it is I just kind of stumbled upon this movie anyways, and I was like, oh, hey, like, this movie's really convenient. It's on Hulu. So I decided, like, all right, like, let me just kind of check it out. It was a just weird, happy accident. So I'd gone on to the trailer, and there, of course, was one scene where I was like, oh, yeah, that's where I obviously remember this film. Because I remember the trailer coming out originally, and I was like, oh my god, that seems like a really crazy scene. And come to find out, I'll need to state what that scene is in the early parts of this film to kind of let everybody know what's happening in this film. So, this movie is to remind me of 1408 or The Shining. I thought that this movie was fascinating. Yeah, it is pretty slow, and at one point we have Kaylee that is to have to mention like every single death that was to be connected to this mirror. But we come to find out that this mirror is to be a thing that haunts people instead of goes on and is to have this kind of weird mirror gimmick. But yeah, so I thought that this movie was surprisingly great. And I thought it was really interesting how they had like two stories going on like simultaneously, and they actually had to like mirror one another. And so with that said, let's talk a little bit more about this film. So we have a guy named Tim who is to have spent a lot of time in a mental hospital from dealing with a traumatic event from his childhood. Tim is to get released from this hospital to go right back to his sister, and his sister is telling him that they need to go on and fulfill the promise that they had made to one another, and that, of course, is to find a way to kill the mirror which had taken their parents away from them, as well as to have them kind of get the inheritance and all the things that they have lost, especially track of time from not being able to talk to one another recently. So we have this film where Haley is further and further pushing Tim and having her own thoughts and agenda about what had really happened with this mirror going on and killing 45 people. And so Kaylee is to try and bring up evidence, and we have Tim that is kind of fighting her on it, really trying to come up with a much more reasonable explanation. And I really loved the whole like couch analogy that he uses also. So we have a film that further and further has these two characters, both Kaylee and Tim, that are to not know if they can trust something or not, if something is real. To the point of Kaylee needing like a cell phone to try to convince her, like, okay, is this a real person? Is this a real object? And she starts to really try and figure out what is to be the illusion here. And we come to find out, while both Haley and Tim are to try to fight off these illusions. In the past, we are to see a flashback that leads both Kaylee and Tim to no longer trust the people that they love, which of course is to be their parents. Having them be even needing to call the police or try and get neighbors involved in this situation. And so, yeah, so going on, I think that is all that I probably want to go on and say. There's probably a lot more stuff that I have to go on and kind of rattle off in spoilers. So, Oculus available on Hulu. You can check this out. I really did like it. So, let me know in the comments below if you were to check out this movie or maybe you saw it originally. So, there are some very dark and gritty scenes that I have to go on and explain in this film. So, there are really two dark scenes here. We have one moment, of course, where actually you can almost say three. So I'll mention three scenes. So we have at one point where Kaylee is to eat a light bulb, and that could be very like gross out like thing for somebody. And we also have a scene where a person is to remove their own fingernail, and again, that could be another thing that people may not want to see a movie for. And then there is also another scene where a person is to go on and not only eat their plate of food, but is to also eat a piece of the plate and just start and eating it. And I was like, all right, like, okay. Because with all those kind of like gross out scenes, I was still fascinated by the film. And also for me, I had gone on and seen stuff like people who would go on to just kind of eat anything. And that was to, of course, be a very weird journey. But hey, like, I was to somehow just click onto that. I was like, all right, like, it's a car crash and I can't look away. But anyways, so with that said, let's just go on and let's double fire this bad boy up. I think it's about the time to, of course, go into this movie. Grading wise, this movie was actually surprisingly great, if I didn't say that already. So let's just go into spoiler time. Spoiler time, it's about that time I'm going to spoil this movie. The very beginning of this film has us in a home, and we see a man who is walking through this hallway with a gun. Both Kaylee and Tim run out of this room, as they are to both be kids at this point, trying to escape from this house. And Tim all of a sudden sees a ghost, which is to look like a woman. And it's like very far away. We can't really make much of anything out, but like we just kind of see a darkened female figure. So the man walks back to the kids, and we find out it's the older Tim holding this gun. And we figure out that the older Tim is to talk to his therapist about this dream, Dr. Graham. So we have Dr. Graham, who is to tell Tim that they have made a lot of progress here, for Tim to have finally admit that he did pull the trigger in the past, because there was a situation where Tim had to have killed his father, and the whole entire time Tim was to be convinced that it was anything other than Tim himself pulling this trigger on his dad. So we have Dr. Graham going even as far as talking to these people, I'm assuming on these kind of this board of directors that are to give people releases. And so Dr. Graham is to state that Tim is cured and he should be able to be released. And we see Kaylee. Kaylee is to be at this auction, and I guess she is to go on and do rather well for herself. And Kaylee is with Michael, seeing that this auction is to have this big mirror arrive, and that is to be the one mirror that is to be the key to this film. Come to find out, Kaylee is to watch this auction and is to see somebody from Skype sell or buy up this mirror, and Kaylee is gonna try and go on and come up with all kinds of excuses for this mirror to come with her, and she says that she's gonna go and repair it, or she's going to do something work-wise with it, but instead she's going to take it into her own house and try to destroy this mirror to stop the hauntings and the curse from happening from this mirror. So Michael asks Kaylee to go with her, or Michael asks Kaylee if he can go with her, and we of course have Kaylee refuse. And so Dr. Graham talks about Tim's transition and how Graham is fine with Tim trying to reconnect with his sister, but also wants to protect all the progress that they had made here. Probably really stating it's like, well, like, your sister is to be an enabler, and like, hey, like, when you go on and you go with this girl, like, you're basically loading up that gun. So maybe you should try and, yeah, reconnect with your sister, but create some distance. So Tim leaves St. Hayden's mental facility to meet up with Kaylee. Kaylee gives Tim his inheritance and says she wasn't allowed to see him, and Tim tells Kaylee, it's like, well, like, I needed my time, like, I needed to process things, and Kaylee's like, well, yeah, I get it, I understand. But still, like, she just wanted to talk to Tim and probably warp his mind of like, well, yeah, but that promise, though. Because you promised. Because that's what she tends to bring up quite often in this film. So Kaylee mentioned she found out where the mirror was quickly sold, but they can finally do what they promised and kill the mirror. So we then flash back to 11 years earlier. So this is where we're going to start seeing like two stories commingle with one another. And like so far, I was kind of like, okay, I was kind of digging the story where Kaylee goes on and starts rattling off all the deaths that happened from this mirror. I could have really thought that there could have been a way to want some of that to just kind of be edited out, or like I'm very mixed about that whole scene because it goes on for a long time. They really could have probably just cut it out, or maybe on another viewing I'd be fine with it. But so let's go into the 11 years earlier. Kaylee and Tim playing laser tag as young kids, while Marie, who is Kaylee and Tim's mother, is telling the movers where it is to put all this furniture. And Alan, it seems, is to be on the phone doing business. And Alan is talking to his job and stating that he doesn't have an assistant or anything like that. He's not working under anybody. This is all on himself. So he, of course, is to really just be like a lot more busy than he previous was, and so on and so forth. So regardless, this is not to be a key thing of this story, what conversation was happening here. So Marie and Alan start to bicker about furniture as Marie is to kind of close this door, and it seems that Alan is putting forth like some expensive bits of furniture, and Marie is like, well, like I didn't want you to kind of spend like this kind of money on this and so Alan's like, well, like, but you know, I told you that I was to immediately be fine with like IKEA kind of furniture and just kind of the cheapest stuff, and you wanted something more lavish and expensive. And so Marie was like, well, yeah, but I only wanted a few pieces. And so we have them bickering, and like it just, they have to just go on and like resolve this with a kiss and a hug. So we see older Tim and Kaylee who go into this hotel room, and Kaylee again tells Tim, it's like, well, like you could just go on and live anywhere else but here. And Tim's like, no, this is fine. And Kaylee again brings up the promise. And we have Kaylee that says that she's doing it tomorrow, that she's going to take down that mirror tomorrow. So, back 11 years ago, we have Marie that talks about her scar that is over her, that is kind of right by her kind of waistband. And she states that it seems to, like, the scar is to be more noticeable as they have gotten here. Alan looks at it and just says that, like, what scar? Alan and Marie start to enjoy their bed together, and Marie is like, well, hey, like, we haven't moved in all the stuff yet. And Alan's like, well, hey, like, we moved in the bed. Marie's like, that's not what I mean. And Alan's just like, yeah, smooching and loving. So, I gotta state, though, like, the performances from a lot of these actors in this movie were amazing. Like, I get that I've already kind of called this movie great, and I know a lot of people would probably just be like, well, yeah, that seems to be, like, Yeah, of course they're gonna have good performances because, but still, like I thought they really like a lot of these actors sold these things really well. So Alan is to make his way downstairs and is to get this juice box, and he all of a sudden notices a ghost kind of looking at him in the background. When Alan goes into his office, the only thing that he notices is that there's a stain on his shirt from this juice box, and we go back to older Kaylee. Kaylee is to get up at night after being with her uh, boyfriend Michael in their bed. She goes to the mirror and she tells it that she's gonna beat it. She's gonna get to it. And so when Kaylee turns, she all of a sudden is to be grabbed by her father and choked. And we now see that that Kaylee is squirming in her bed. Michael is to try to wake her to have her realize that this is all just a dream, to try to calm her down. Uh, the next thing we see is both Kaylee and Michael, and Michael states that Kaylee is to need to go and get her own printer because Kaylee was to print off these unusual crime scene photos, and some other people were to find said photos and be kind of mortified by them. After talking about the repairs for the mirror, kind of reconfirming that even Kaylee is talking to Michael about these repairs, we have Kaylee that promises to Michael that everything will be fine in a few days and she'll be back to her normal self. I think that Kaylee is to promise a lot, and we don't even know if she's going to deliver by the end of all this. If anyone has ever gone on and seen a horror film, we have to think that Kaylee might realize that things may not turn out the way that they're supposed to. And that is always to be a risk in a horror film. So Kaylee goes to where the mirror is being temporarily held in this kind of this storage room or this kind of back room of some location where we have a bunch of crates and boxes and antiques of a lot of kind. And Kaylee is to take this this blanket from the mirror and is to greet it. Like, this is just so weird. Like, Kaylee's like relationship with this mirror as she's like talking to it, and like is she gonna be like how Ghostbusters 2 was, where they would take the mood slime and they would sing to it and say supportive, nurturing things to it. You're not sleeping with it, are you, Ray? So Kaylee is to show to us that the mirror at the bottom of it is cracked, and Kaylee is happy that she was to have had that at least happen to the mirror, as this mirror is not even all that clean. You can't very well see your reflection into this mirror, but also who would really go on and clean this mirror for how it's consistently connected with all of these deaths. Also, who would go on to buy this mirror if they are to know that this mirror may have a history? Might it just be that it just looks good looking, and so it's like, yeah, buy that up. Kaylee notices in the reflection of the mirror that there seems to be some statues in the background that are moving. And Kaylee in the mirror sees 3 statues there, but when she looks back, she only sees 2. So Kaylee goes back to this location to see 3 things there. Kaylee starts ripping these sheets off, and is to see 2 out of 3 be head statues. By the time that Kaylee gets to the 3rd, Marv, who was bringing Kaylee in to see the mirror and tell her that she's all set, Haley gets frightened by Marv and then looks back, and the 3rd piece is gone. Making us probably realize that the number system possibly in this movie will stop people from going crazy or seeing these illusions. Anyways, so Tim calls Kaylee to tell her that he has a new phone, and Tim says to Kaylee, it's like, well, I don't really like how we ended things. Can we meet up somewhere? And Kaylee's like, well, yeah, like, we can meet up at the house. And Tim's like, oh, so where are you living? And Kaylee's like, no, like, you know the house. So we go back, flashback time, folks. Marie notices her plants are starting to die. Alan takes a call and is to hear this kind of unusual, like, I think it's like a whisper, or it's just some kind of unusual noise. Here's kind of the weird thing. When, like, before I was to go on and record this video, I was to hear this unusual humming coming from my light source, my, like, kind of light bulb thing. And I was like, okay, this is really weird. I've never had a light bulb hum before. And so what happened is that I took the light bulb out and I put a new one in, and the humming stopped. I was like, okay, what was that sound? Was it, like, really just time to just put a new light bulb in, or what? That seemed just very weird. But hopefully it has nothing to do with the actual, like, cording or whatever itself, because, man, would that suck. That's the only light thing that I have in this entire room. So regardless, let's go on and let's go back to the story. So Tim and Kaylee play more laser tag outside as their, of course, younger self, because this is a flashback. Marie and Kaylee argue about a cell phone because Kaylee states that there is a number of kids her age that have one, and so Marie, of course, doesn't want to get her daughter one, and so Kaylee ends up calling her mother by her actual name, which is Marie. And Marie is like, oh wow, like that makes me want to go on and just run out and like buy it even more. Like my daughter, my love of mine, my like she goes on and I'm like, man, like uh we really just have uh Katie Sackhoff who really like delivers like this role really well, but again, like still everybody does, but I really like Katie in this movie. So we have Alan who is just kind of just biting his nail, so much so that it's starting to bleed, and we have Marie that is to tell the kids like, well, hey, like never be like your dad and bite your nails. I hope that never is a hereditary kind of thing where you kids do that. So Alan puts, of course, a band-aid on it. So Kaylee asks about a lady that Alan was to have in his office, and Alan had no answer. So now older Tim and Kaylee talk about Kaylee's dog that she brings in this cage, and she just calls the dog Doc. And Tim is like, you never named the dog? And so she's like, no, because she probably just bought the dog, because there's a whole reason for that. Kaylee tells Tim it's probably been a while since he's been in this home, so Tim should probably look around, right? In a house that is probably haunted. Sounds like a good idea. Why don't you go down in the basement and probably get killed off too? Because, yeah, that seems like a really good idea. So, Tim notices in one of these rooms an unusual chain. And Kaylee is to talk about the house. Even talking about, like, well, hey, like, maybe after all this is done, maybe we should sell the house and kind of go our separate ways or whichever. So, both Kaylee and Tim are to bring in the mirror, and this mirror is fairly large. And we had Tim that was to ask Kaylee how she was to really think how she could even bring in this mirror by herself. And for me, I'm like, well, yeah, it looks like a really big mirror, but in all honesty, you could probably just kind of slowly but surely kind of like kind of roll it into the house. But again, like I would be concerned because it's a fragile item. Maybe having a dolly, but I don't know, maybe the mirror is far too big. But either way, there would be a ton of easy solutions. If Kaylee could have rationally have brought that in, and plus, Kaylee looks like a really strong woman. It looks like she works out. So, she, of course, was also in Guardians of the Galaxy. I think she could figure out how to bring a big mirror into her home by hiring people. So, because she has that Guardians of the Galaxy money. Anyways, so come to find out, Tim is to notice this unusual contraption that is to be on the ceiling, and we come to find out that whole thing is a contingency plan or a kill switch to have this mirror be placed in that kind of wrecking ball kind of swing of what is to be this kill switch, and this item is to supposedly go on and kill or destroy this mirror. And I was like, okay, like, for how they also break this down is that Kaylee and Tim need to be in this room every so often, or this mechanism is going to go off by accident. So, like, I thought that was like, okay, that is kind of a weird thing. Like, what happens if they fall asleep? What happens if they're kind of not in the room and they're kind of eating, or like they're just kind of biding time, or whatever till something really happens? Either way. So, what if they get locked outside? That could be a thing. But so, but the mirror still gets crushed. The mirror still gets killed, assumingly. So Kylie is to set up these cameras and is doing this video, and Tim starts to walk away from the cameras, not wanting to have anything to do with this. But Kaylee and Tim start to talk about all of this, and so like Tim is to like be involved in some way, or we even have Haley that talks about Tim being this kind of crazy person that she doesn't feel she can absolutely trust him, and Tim is like, I'm right here in the room. You bitch. I'm out. Deuces. Wow, like, yeah, I get it that like Tim could like be a person that Kaylee may not have a lot of trust in, but like he's the only one there. Michael could have came also. But Michael doesn't know what he's getting himself into. So like that is the bigger problem. Where Tim and Kaylee have experienced this before. So she takes both of their phones and is to mention about certain clocks and thermostats, and so there's to be a countdown to like every hour on the hour that Michael is to have to call Kaylee, and there's a 30-minute thing for the the kind of the wrecking ball thing to go off if someone is not alive by the end of all this, the contingency plan. So we have Kaylee who has the thermostat to kind of make sure, like, if temperatures are to rise and drop in certain parts of the house, to know if there's a ghost in that location, and alarms go off when there is to have a change in temperature. So Kaylee states that the mirror is to be a supernatural force. It sounds like a very bizarre way to put it, but she also states that there have been 14 deaths that have happened with the location of this mirror, and there must be some like real connection there. So we have like, I'm gonna go through like certain ones of these, and then we'll just kind of get to the more current one that connects this story. So the first death is to be from 1754 in London, where this mirror's owner goes to have people find his body in this fireplace because he had burned himself to death. We had in 1904 a woman held it in her bathroom and died in this bathtub full of water from dehydration. That seemed very unusual to me. In 1975, a woman dies by bleeding to death from a miscarriage, and she'd also had like teeth pulled out, and I guess she had pulled out her own teeth. And we go on to have Tim hearing all these deaths. And so Tim states, is like, well, hey, like in 2001, like our family had bought a new couch, and our grandfather had like a heart attack, and a guy named Robbie had gotten hit by a car, and our cat had run away. Like, should we blame the couch for all of that happening? And we have Kaylee that's like, well, like that's not the same thing. And but it's like, but yeah, but isn't it a weird coincidence? So we have Tim that tells Kaylee, it's like, well, just tell us why we're all really here. Just bring up the most current uh, owner. So 2002, we have Marie that breaks down in a mental hysteria and is also tortured and murdered by supposedly, and there is a gap there. And Tim is like, just say it was our father. Just say the truth. That it was our dad. And Kaylee won't say it because she feels that it wasn't their dad. Like their dad was under this mirror's spell or trance or whatever, and so it wasn't really him. So they also go on to state that Tim had shot Alan while Kaylee watched. So very, very dark and gritty situation here. So we finally have Tim that tells Kaylee, it's like, well, hey, like, how about we just resolve this right here and now? How about I just go on and take this stool and smash this mirror? And we have Kaylee that's like, yeah, you're not going to do that now, are you? Because when Tim turns and wants to take this chair to this mirror, he then drops it and starts talking to Kaylee, and she's like, yeah, like, you really couldn't have gone on and done this, because Oliver, a guy who was to have had this mirror also, was to have this fireplace poker, and instead of committing to bashing the mirror, he's instead walked onto ongoing traffic and died instead. Having us realize that this mirror has a defense mechanism, and so the counter to that is that the weighted item will fall if no one is there within 30 minutes. So we then go back to the past. Alan is on a computer and takes his band-aid off. To have all of a sudden the band-aid reappear on his finger, and he's like, okay, what the heck is going on? So Alan tries to take off the band-aid again to take off his fingernail from his finger. And I was like, oh my god, all right. We're almost getting to kind of like Fly territory a little bit. And for anybody who is to go on and know the Jeff Goldblum movie, like that at some points does get pretty gross. And once you kind of see the Fly, like any other movie in comparison, and I don't want to go on and try to see movies that are to be in that ballpark of film. Uh, but yeah, like really, you've kind of gone on and seen everything after you've seen The Fly. Uh, so there's certain movies that I've kind of somehow built up a tolerance, but that's not a like a goal in life to have either. But anyways, so Alan asked the kids about this kind of unusual book stacking, and I'm like, all right, this is like Ghostbusters and like all these kind of other poltergeisty like movies all over again because we have these books that are kind of unusually lined up together, and so Alan is to like say it's like, well, kids, like I know that you've kind of been like messing in my office and like I know you're trying to kill your mother's plants. And if I were the kids, I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, why would we care about that kind of thing? And plus, also, the kids had been like told that they should not have gone on to their father's office anyways. So why would they care? So we have Tim, older Tim, that is with Kaylee, and we have Tim that goes on to talk about how there could be certain things that make dogs sick and can also like kill plants, and of course Tim was forced by his therapist to kind of look this thing up, and that might have been the thing that went on to uh, affect this home. So both back at the flashback, the kids talk about the dog and how the dog is to seemingly be ill. He's kind of complaining and whining and crying. So Marie talks to Alan about he is now to have gotten a gun. And Marie was kind of scared. She thought that she would see people, and so Alan's like, "Well, yeah, like I have a gun and it's not loaded." And so yeah, so when Marie and Alan, after this kind of slight argument, Marie turns to leave the room, and Alan ends up calling her like a grotesque cow, and Marie is kind of like, "What? What did you just call me, mother?" Slap, slap. But no, that's not what really happened. But Marie just kind of backpedals and does a double take, and she's like, "Wait a minute, what?" But then she kind of just walks off of like, "Wow, like I didn't realize that that argument was that bad." But Alan didn't actually like. We don't see him actually say these words, so it could have been ghost number 3 or 4. Who knows? So maybe ghost number 45. Either way. So I'm just making up random numbers. So that's not an actual cast list of like, oh, I'm going to see ghost number 45 later on. Isn't that great? So next up, the dog, of course, is to wake Marie, and because the dog is like desperate to just want to get into Alan's office. And so when Marie is to get to the dog bites her, and she's like, what the heck? So Marie just puts the dog in the office and just kind of locks it in there because she's kind of concerned about the dog. So Marie hears Alan talking to someone, and so Marie wants to talk to Alan, and so again, they are both arguing, and Kaylee appears, and so like they stop their arguing. The next thing we see is that Alan is going golfing, just wanting to really get out of the house because I'm sure Alan is like, man, like the more time I can stay away from this home, the better. So while Marie is cleaning, the dog is to again bark. So we have Marie that is to argue with Alan about the dog later on, and so Alan opens his office to realize that the dog is not even in the room. And it's like, okay, what happened with the dog? So Tim has rational reasons for everything here. And Alan finds the dog and brings it to the vet. It seems that when Alan does bring the dog to the vet, that they're not going to go on and have this dog be doing so well. They might even need to put the dog down. And there might be some points in here where I definitely were to have gotten confused, but I kind of got to, in a roundabout way, the story. So Tim talks about fuzzy trace things that are to explain again what is to have happened. And Tim was to have kind of created that with his doctor and again have a rational explanation. So while again for the 18th upteenth time, parents are arguing, both the kids walk down to see their parents arguing, and they also are to see both the kids a woman in Alan's office. I think Kaylee was to see it better than Tim did, but so Alan, it seems, was having an affair with his with this woman. I'm assuming it might have been a coworker of sorts. And so Tim is like, well, yeah, like our dad was having an affair. And we had Kaylee who was talking to Tim, and like both of them are old. So Tim tells Kaylee as they're older, like, yeah, like our dad having an affair. And so Kaylee is like, well, what seduced him? So by the more and more that they start to argue, Kaylee realizes in the room that the temperature in the room has changed 3 degrees. So Tim is to look into the phone, and it seems the phone still has a dial tone, so, or may not have a dial tone. So Kaylee brings in the dog, and she puts it in front of the mirror, and we have Tim that is to take the dog and is to bring it back outside, and Tim tells Kaylee that the only person that is threatening that dog is to not be this mirror, it's to be you. And you're kind of putting this dog at risk. So Tim just wants them to leave the house and turn off the cameras and like unarm that anchor and just leave. Kaylee sees dead plants and is to realize like, okay, like I can watch the footage back and see what had happened or what had happened. So Michael calls, and Kaylee mentions that she's not even sure if she can trust that this is to really be Michael calling on the other end of this phone. And she states that it's like a 50-50 possibility that it's really him. So, like, everything is like she can't trust a thing for this house is really messing with everything. So, now Kaylee is to possibly figure out the mirror ratio of effect. That maybe not every room can be affected by this mirror or certain locations. So Kaylee is starting to just figure this out and want to try and see if she can beat this mirror by just kind of mathematically going like, oh, this place isn't affected by the mirror. Tim goes outside trying to make a phone call, and he all of a sudden finds himself inside the house. And he is very baffled by that. So Kaylee noticed that Tim had walked back inside, and Tim doesn't remember that at all. And so Kaylee is now to put a camera in front of Tim and state, it's like, well, hey, like, repeat back what all just happened. So, flashback time, Marie staring into the mirror while Kaylee watches, and like Marie is starting to more and more become affected by this mirror. And so Marie makes toast and is to be drinking wine. Marie can't really trust Alan's word completely anymore, but if Alan states that he is going somewhere, that Marie has to just kind of give Alan the benefit of the doubt that could be where he's really going. So Marie asks about if they were to have seen the woman. And Tim saw the woman by the stairs, and then the woman went back into the office, so it seems that the woman does live in there. So Marie looks into the office, and we have the name Mary Soul is written on a lot of this one paper, as well as kind of written on this one kind of sheet. Marie starts breaking things in frustration, and the mirror shows Marie. And the Marie in the mirror is to have her scar that was shown earlier reopened. I was like, what is the right word here? And we also see that the mirrored Marie is to have these silver kind of white eyes. So I'm assuming it's more like kind of silver or metallic. I don't know why that is, but it is what it is. So Marie is now to have lost her mind, and so she starts choking Tim. A lot of choking kind of weirdly goes on in this film. Because I guess they couldn't have gone on and done anything else. So the kids run from the mother as they get to a room and shut it. Marie starts banging on the door, and Alan finds Marie and is worried that she has kind of cut herself. And when Alan is to try to like talk to Marie, they all of a sudden start wrestling, and Alan has to kind of choke Marie from behind, and that leads to Marie passing out. So Alan tries to call 911, but by the time he starts to get somebody, all of a sudden the mirror starts taking control of Alan. So Alan hangs up the phone, and he decides to instead take Marie's body and starts to drag it into their room. So Kylie asks about Marie, and Alan tells her to go to bed. I'm sorry, that doesn't seem like a real rational response that I would just take, like, oh yeah, I'll just go back to bed and everything will be fine. So Kaylee asks where Tim is. Alan says, no, so Kaylee asks, like, well, hey, Tim, where are you? So Alan, in the flashback, tells the kids that tells them both that Marie is sick, and for them to not go into the room where her mother is. And so he really is to tell the both of them, it's like, well, hey, just kind of stay in the office and play video games. And Kaylee tells her father, it's like, well, I thought that you didn't want us to be in this room. And so Alan's like, whatever. So older Kaylee gives older Tim an apple. Tim is to need to replace this bulb, and you can probably figure out where this is going. So Kaylee asks if there's food that Alan is to drop off for their mother in the flashback, and we have lights that both go out in the flashback as well as current time, where we start to see this bulb consistently go out. So Kaylee, after consistently taking this bulb and it quickly burns out, Kaylee is to put down this apple to adjust this light bulb, and is to grab supposedly this light bulb by accident and bites into it, realizing that, of course, is what she had eaten, and she takes this glass out of her mouth, and her mouth starts to bleed. The weird thing is, when Tim re-enters the room and both of them are there, the bleeding stops, and Kaylee is now holding on to the apple, and the bulb is back where the apple was. And so Kaylee is to realize, like, well, hey, like, we should really just stay together, because these illusions stop when we're together. So Kaylee is to be upset with her dad because they have completely ran out of food. And Kaylee also wants her dad to call a doctor for their mother. And Alan just states that it's on my list of things to do. And that's what he just keeps repeatedly telling them as he's staring into the mirror. So Kaylee wants to go into the room that her mother is in, and is to not care about their father's warning. So when Kaylee goes into the room where her mother is in, we find out that Marie is chained in the room, and it seems that Marie has bizarrely turned into this, like, almost like wild dog, it seems, and is to not be the same person of which that uh, Kaylee remembers. But then at some point, we do have this really amazing moment where Marie just kind of reverts back and starts to remember things, but that doesn't happen right away. Um, or anytime soon, but still, I thought that was a really cool moment in this movie when that happens. So, Kaylee argues with Alan, and he grounds both of the kids. Even though Tim probably didn't do anything, it's like, well, no, I don't trust either one of you, so you're grounded. So the kids go on and just try to find in the yellow pages a doctor that they could call. So whenever they call somebody, the person is to tell them to have their father call instead of them. So they realize, like, okay, I guess calling people is completely out. And it's even the same voice. It's the same person answering the call each time. So Kaylee gets her neighbor Bob, and Alan goes on and is to talk to Bob, all while his hand is against this wall, and his fingernails are all gone and they're bleeding, and he just leaves this like bloody handprint upon this wall. He doesn't go on and clean it up. He just kind of is to convince Bob. It's like, well, hey, like Kaylee is just kind of lashing out because her mother is getting real sick. So like, I'm sorry that she went on and bothered you. And Bob's like, okay, yeah, I can completely buy that story. And so Bob leaves. And so we, of course, have the good old, like, you can't trust a young kid because they're young and they want to, like, create havoc or chaos or whatever. So, yeah, you just can't trust them. Anyways, so Tim is to oddly like be looking at the kids who were to have been watching their dad and have him kind of walk away. And when Tim all of a sudden is seeing older Kaylee, we I think have Kaylee ask Tim, it's like, well, hey, where were you just now? So Kaylee realizes that uh God, what is the contingency plan is to about to fall and adjust it before it falls. So Tim continues to see both him or Kaylee's younger self. So when we have our characters completely lose electricity and Kaylee is kind of running around putting up these lanterns one by one, she figures out about the illusions. She is to take out her cell phone and is to like realize that some of the objects that she's holding aren't really real as she puts it up to the cell phone. So, and this is almost kind of like one of those kind of horror video games that you have this kind of either cell phone or this camera, and you would have to put it up against these certain things and know if they're real or not. Or you would have the camera that goes on to show the monster, and it's something that's not actually really there. So yeah, like that ends up going into becoming like a lot of like cell phone games and stuff like that, where you kind of have to look around and then, oh, it's right there. Kind of like Pokemon Go and all kinds of other just goofy games that kind of were to be popular for a certain span of time. So, uh, young Tim uh, talks to Alan about fixing lights as when Tim is to go into this room that he knows his father is in, we have this woman that seems to be close to Alan and further gets to the door that Tim tries to open. And Tim, of course, runs away from this menacing looking woman. So, uh, we have Kaylee that has, or we have Kaylee that sees Marie and stabs her, and we have her not kind of test this with the phone, and come to find out, Kaylee is to think it was Marie, but instead she is to realize that it was Michael. I guess Michael had possibly shown up here, and we have Kaylee that's like, well, wait a minute, like, the piece wasn't really real, and Michael isn't really here. And we also had Michael that calls Kaylee to do his kind of like every hour on the other hour call. And so we have Kaylee that, of course, is very confused about what to believe. So Kaylee puts the cell phone next to Michael and realizes that Michael might have been really there. So she starts crying. She gets all emotional because the house had tricked her into killing her own boyfriend. Possibly. So she was to even think that the plate that she stabbed him with wasn't real. So Tim tries to call the police. And so when he tries to call, we have this thing that answers that is to tell him to, like, we'll have your dad call, or the doctor will be there tomorrow, or like, it has this unusual way of answering things. And so Tim's like, well, I guess this isn't going to work out. So Tim wants both him and his sister to just wait for the kill squid, the kill switch to go off, because that will be the way to destroy what's going on here, and hope that that will finally just, like, why didn't they just do that before? Why, like, right out of the gate, just, like, put the mirror in the house, leave the house completely, and just have the mirror get smashed by this kill switch. They, I guess, had to wait till, like, plants started to die and crazy things started to happen to, I guess, like, have them further and further just wait things out, which I didn't quite understand. They must have just thought that they could have figured out a way to defeat this thing, but there isn't a way to just easily defeat it. But so Tim and Kaylee are noticing that they're older selves. So this is older Kaylee and Tim watching two people that look like them make their way into that room. And so Tim tries to call the police again, and that's when we get the whole thing where it's like, well, yeah, you can't trust that police call. So in the flashback, Alan is in front of the mirror and then goes to retrieve his gun and kind of loads it. Young Tim saw and runs to young Kaylee, and so older Kaylee and Tim see themselves, their doppelgangers, and a woman that is sounding just like Alan, their dad. And is to start to like tell him, it's like, well, hey, I told you not to go into this room. And they're like, okay, we're creeped out by that. So the kids run to a room, and Marie is to break her food plate and starts eating the food plate. So Alan finds Marie and unchains her, and so Marie just starts to like really just step up and just kind of really just shows like, yeah. Like she really just like, yeah, I'm like have my like I'm really just kind of showing off like how like straight I can stand. Anyways, so Kaylee and Tim ask if their dad is gone, and or no, wait, this is older. Kaylee asks Tim, older. Kaylee asks Tim if their dad is gone, and Tim is like, well, I don't think he was ever really there. So very confusing moment, but still, like, that's what is stated. So older Tim is to start to figure out that it's trying to push them away from that room, forcing them to go into this room that is nowhere near the mirror, because there's a possibility that these two are trying to plan to take out this mirror. So the kids open the door to see Marie there, and so the kids decide that they want to try to get downstairs, hoping that Marie will go somewhere else and not be just still by that door. So by the time they open the door, they run. Kaylee, with this golf club, is to hit her own mother. And Kaylee runs into this one room and jumps from this house from off of this window and falls, and is to kind of be holding her knee in somewhat of that kind of like Family Guy thing where like Peter Griffin's like, ah, and that goes on for like, it seems to be like the rest of the episode. He's just like, and continues to do that. So Kaylee starts to look into the house to see this ghostly couple looking out from this window, and Tim is to, of course, feel tricked by Alan, and Alan fires this gun, and Kaylee needs to go back for Tim, and when she does, she sees Michael in that room, and we of course realize that they have to come up with some way of like a deterrent for these people to not want to go into this room, and so like bringing up like their worst or most horrific moment would of course be for Kaylee, Michael, who had just died. So Kaylee sees Tim, then or young Kaylee sees Tim, then gets choked by Marie. Marie stops and starts to realize the wrong that she is doing, and she lets the kids run off. Alan goes into the room and is to start shooting into Marie. So Kaylee sees Alan walking off, and so the kids trying to go on, and they try to attack the mirror with these golf clubs. And every time they try to swing, it doesn't hit the mirror. So Alan has a gun to Kaylee, and Tim shoots, or Tim. I'm trying to figure out the way. Tim goes on to be with Alan, and we have Alan that is to take the gun and is to basically shoot himself. And when Alan falls back, he ends up cracking the mirror with the force that he falls back. So we all of a sudden have alarms that are going off. And we have Tim that starts to realize that those alarms are, of course, to alert Tim that the temperature has risen, and that, of course, like they're gonna have to kind of adjust the anchor contraption thing. And so the next thing that we see is that Kaylee is in this room, and she all of a sudden sees her mother in this mirror. And so Kaylee starts talking to her mother. It's like, "Oh, Mom, is that really you?" And they start hugging, and Tim wants to go on and just let loose this kill switch because he's sick of this. And so when Tim finally does release the kill switch, he accidentally kills Kaylee instead, because Kaylee is in front of the mirror hugging her mother. And so Tim then realizes he accidentally killed his own sister, and the kill switch thing does not go on and destroy this mirror, even though you would possibly think with that heavy amount of impact that it might have, like, again, cracked the mirror pretty good or something. But no, I guess they really wanted this to, like, feel that there could be a sequel somewhere down the road for this movie, in case they wanted to make a sequel. Because maybe this movie did surprisingly well. So we have in the flashback that Kaylee tells Tim, since she was alive then, that, hey, when we are big and strong, we're going to come back and we're going to make this right. We're going to kill this mirror. It's like, you promise? And Tim promises. So we have in both scenarios, both past and present time, cops show up. And so we have Tim being said he is to just be a murderer, and Tim is to try to tell everybody that it was the mirror. And so we have one of the cops that is to see the footage of Tim killing his sister, and that's all that they really see. So they're like, well, hey, like this guy murdered his own sister, and there's footage to prove it. So this guy is going to go away for a long time. So really, that's the end of the movie. I think Kaylee was to have like filed like some report, um, like kind of telling what had happened, and they probably didn't believe a lick of it. So, with that said, that is to be the film. There might have been some points where I got really confused, and there is also an easy way to get confused by this movie because there's a lot of the breaking down of the young and the old and whatever, and there were sometimes where I got confused because my notes weren't perfect, so I had to kind of remember like where we were in the film. But other than that, I'm going to get out of here. Hopefully you liked Oculus, or maybe you were to just be intrigued by what this movie really was. Anyway, I'm just going to say I'm going to get out of here. Thank you for listening for this, or listening to this. Thank you for whatever. I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.